Hello everyone. Welcome to the GS Foundation orientation session for the year 2027. Now, because this is your first class for the foundation class, in this particular class, we will be basically discussing as to how should be your journey for the civil service examination. That is, in this particular class, you'll get to know the answers to a number of common queries which generally students have with respect to their UPSC journey. So let's start the orientation session. See, generally what happens is when students starts their UPSC journey, right? The students have a number of doubts in their mind. So what we're trying to do in this particular orientation session is we're trying to address your doubts before you take a plunge into the journey itself. What could be some of the common queries or the questions of the students? Let's see some of the common queries or the questions. So students might have this kind of doubt as to what is the pattern of the UPSC exam and how much marks should you actually score in prelims, mains and interview. This is the first thing. Second, you must understand the syllabus of UPSC is extremely vast, and you may have read or you may have heard from a number of students who have cleared the exam that UPSC preparation is more about the smart work, right? So as part of the smart work, because the syllabus is extremely vast, you need to identify which subjects are more important. And within those subjects, which topics, which themes are more important. So here in this particular class, you'll get to know as to which subject should you focus more upon for prelims as well as the mains examination. You all know the importance of current affairs, right? The journey for civil service examination is incomplete without focusing on the current affairs. I have not come across any topper so far who has said that I have not studied current affairs. So you need to integrate current affairs into your static preparation. So here, how much time should you spend on reading newspaper? What is the importance of current affairs for your prelims and mains examination? And this is the kind of queries which I keep getting from the students all the time. As to when should you start practicing answer writing? Should you start practicing answer writing right from day one? Or should you wait for some part of the syllabus to be completed to start writing answers? You'll get answers to even this particular question as well. Then how much importance should you give to your qualifying papers like your CSAT and the language paper in the mains? So there are two language papers. One is compulsory English paper and there is regional language paper. So how much of importance should you give to that? So what students keep doing is, they keep studying the entire length and breadth of syllabus throughout the year. Now what actually matters for clearing the prelims as well as the mains examination is how well are you able to consolidate your preparation? How well are you able to revise the entire length and breadth of syllabus just before the prelims or the mains examination? And you must have repeatedly heard about it that note making is quite important. How should you prepare the notes to clear the prelims and mains examination, which is as important as preparing for the examination itself? Next is, what strategy do toppers follow to clear the exam? Some people are able to clear the exam in a very first attempt. I have come across people who have cleared the UPSC exam while pursuing their foundation in the very first year. So what different strategy are they adopting so as to clear that particular exam? So lastly, we'll discuss how we at ForumIAS, how we will help you in your civil services journey. So what all things you will be getting as part of the GS Foundation so that your preparation for UPSC Civil Service Examination is both holistic as well as comprehensive. Now, these are some of the things that we will be covering in this particular class. So, having discussed as to what all things we'll be covering, let me set the agenda of this class. How is this particular class structured? As far as the agenda of this class is concerned, the most important thing what we will be doing is, first we'll look at the exam pattern. Probably most of you must be knowing about the exam pattern, but for those of you who don't know the exam pattern, it will be a new thing to know what is the structure of the exam like. After discussing the exam pattern, we'll discuss the approach for your prelims. In this approach, we'll see the syllabus for prelims examination, what is the relative weightage for different subjects for the prelims examination, so that you get an idea as to which subjects are your core subjects, which subjects should you focus more upon while preparing for prelims examination. And also, like I said, you should know how much marks should you score in the prelims to be above the cutoff. So we'll look at the trends in the cutoff for prelims for the last 5 years. And what I will be doing is, because I'm going to teach you economy in your foundation, I will be taking up one particular topic for today's discussion. A very simple topic. I will be taking up that particular topic. After that particular topic, we'll take up some PYQs as well as some practice questions from what I would have covered. Now, this is basically to make you understand how the class is being structured, how we teach things at ForumIAS. As far as the approach for mains is concerned, the same thing, syllabus, relative weightage, and a particular topic for the mains. And lastly, our teaching philosophy. This is how we are going to structure this particular class. So without wasting much time, let's get on with the class. And let's understand the exam pattern. With respect to understanding the exam pattern, think you are clearing the UPSC exam. You go on to become a district collector. You are posted in a particular district. And let's say this particular district is quite infamous for the farmers' suicides. And as a district collector, you are required to solve the problems faced by the farmers. What could be these problems? Problem number one is, you must be knowing historically the farmers in India were actually exploited by the landowners, which is the zamindars historically. And now, even to a certain extent, that same thing has continued even now as well. Exploitation of the tenants. Next is, it is being said that around 49% of the area is still under rain-fed agriculture, which clearly shows there's lack of access to irrigation facilities. So this is the second problem. The third problem is, some of you must have heard about a government scheme called as PM Kisan. Under this PM Kisan, the government is providing for cash transfer of rupees 6,000 to all the land owning farmers. It might so happen that in the district where you are posted, some of the farmers, even though they are owning the land, they might not be able to get the benefits. And let's say, some of you must have heard about MSP, minimum support price. Farmers are going to sell the agriculture produce in the market at MSP. But unfortunately, they are not getting MSP because they are exploited by the middlemen or the traders. And because of all of this, the income of the farmers in the district where you are posted is too less. So how will you solve the problem of the farmers then? You know, to solve the problems of the farmer in your district, you need a knowledge of different subjects. Example being, for the first one, you need knowledge of history. For the second one, you need knowledge of geography. For the third one, you need knowledge of how technology can be used for welfare of the farmers. For fourth, you need to understand about MSP, whether it is legal or whether there is a compulsion on the FCI to procure the crops or not. And why is the income of the farmers low? So obviously when UPSC has framed the syllabus, UPSC has framed the syllabus by keeping in mind the job requirement of an IAS officer. As an IAS officer, you cannot have specialization in only one field. Understand that. You need to be a generalist That is, you need to have a knowledge of all the subjects. But does it mean that in each of the subject you should become expert? No. It generally means that you should have a good knowledge of all the subjects, right? That is how UPSC has framed the syllabus. So by keeping in mind what is a requirement of a civil servant, based upon that, you have the exam pattern. In the exam pattern, there are 3 stages: prelims, mains, and interview. As far as the prelims examination is concerned, in prelims examination, there is GS paper 1 and there is GS paper 2. In GS paper 1, you generally have subjects like economy, polity, history, geography, environment, science and tech, current affairs, and so on. And CSAT is more about comprehension, maths, quants, etc. And you must be knowing that CSAT is a qualifying paper where you are required to score minimum 33% of the 200 marks. 33% of 200 marks, which is like you have to score 66 marks. Now the question is, what is UPSC testing as far as the prelims examination is concerned? In prelims examination, UPSC is basically testing your conceptual understanding. It is basically testing whether have you understood various concepts in polity, economy, geography, environment, and so on. So that way, prelims is less of rote learning and more of conceptual understanding. So someone is very good at mugging up. For him, prelims is not going to be easy because prelims is less about rote learning, more about having that kind of conceptual understanding. Once you clear the prelims, then you go for the mains examination. See, as far as the knowledge part is concerned, the knowledge part is already tested in your prelims examination. As far as the mains examination is concerned, in mains examination, what is being tested is your critical bent of mind. When I say critical bent of mind is whether are you good at analyzing things. That is what is critical bent of mind. Example being, let's say from the economy, we have a law called as National Food Security Act, NFSA. Some of you must have heard about PDS, right? Public Distribution System. So under NFSA, we are providing for food grains. In the prelims examination, you may get a question on features of National Food Security Act, features. But in mains, rather than asking you features of National Food Security Act, they might ask you to do a critical analysis of National Food Security Act. That is, to what extent National Food Security Act has helped us in addressing hunger and malnutrition, which is more critical bent of mind. It is not just critical bent of mind. Mains examination is also more about power of expression. That is, how good are you able to express yourself in less number of words? How logically are you able to put forth your arguments? Even that is also tested in the mains examination. So what actually happens in mains? You have 2 qualifying papers, Indian language paper and English language paper. You can see this is also in red. These 2 are also in red, which means they are qualifying paper. The remaining are essay paper, GS paper 1, paper 2, paper 3, paper 4, and your optional paper. And last is your interview, which is basically a test of your personality. When I said test of your personality, it means here UPSC is basically testing your aptitude, your attitude, whether are you fit enough to become an IAS officer, right? That is what is your test of your personality. So first one is more about conceptual understanding and knowledge. Second one is more about critical bent of mind and the power of expression. And third one is your test of your personality. That is how different things are tested in different stages of UPSC journey. Now, let's look at the prelim syllabus. In prelim syllabus, you have current affairs, you have history, geography, polity, economy, environment and biodiversity, science and tech. So these are your syllabus for the UPSC prelims. But what I would also want to highlight here is you must understand syllabus mentioned by UPSC is just indicative in nature. It is just indicative as to what all things should you actually prepare. If you want to prepare, the best way to start your journey is by looking at the PYQs, previous year questions. Because the previous year questions will tell you as to on what all topics UPSC has asked questions on. Based upon that, you can actually guess on what topics UPSC could ask questions in future. Let me just give you one example. Let's say, with respect to polity, within polity, you have this Indian Constitution. But how much importance should you give to Constitution of India as compared to, let's say, political system? That you will get to know only by looking at the PYQs. Example being, if you look at the PYQs, especially from Indian polity section, you'll understand that from a constitution, repeatedly questions are asked from Parliament, that is Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. Questions are also asked repeatedly from fundamental rights as well as DPSPs, Directive Principles of State Policy. Same way, if I could tell you about my own subject, which is economy. Now, with respect to economy, if you see here UPSC has mentioned syllabus as sustainable development, poverty, inclusion, demographics, and so on. But in reality, if you analyze the PYQs, you'll actually understand that in UPSC prelims, generally questions are asked from the theme of banking and finance. But can you see here? Is banking and finance explicitly mentioned here in the syllabus? No. But how will you get to know that this theme is important? By analyzing the PYQs. Apart from that, if you analyze the PYQs, previous year questions, you'll get to know that from banking and finance, earlier, UPSC used to ask more questions on monetary policy. You must have studied about repo, you must have heard about repo rate, reverse repo rate, bank rate, CRR, etc. Right? But now, UPSC has changed the weightage where UPSC has started asking more questions from the theme of capital market. This is a recent change. So imagine a student who does not know the PYQ. Such a student will continue to focus on monetary policy without actually realizing that now the focus has shifted from monetary policy to the capital market, which is basically your stock exchanges. So these are the things that you'll get to know by analyzing the PYQs. That is where, the first thing what you should do for preparing for UPSC is take a printout of your syllabus. Take a printout of your syllabus and put that syllabus right in front of your study table so that you are able to understand as to what all things should you study for prelims. That is must. Second, we will be providing you with a material. In that particular material, we will be providing you with all the PYQs. Because you're starting the journey now itself, it might become difficult for you to analyze the PYQs, but keep this book in handy, the PYQ book. So as soon as, let's say, we complete one particular chapter in the foundation class, you should go back from that particular chapter, you should see what are the PYQs. So by looking at the PYQs, you'll get to know as to what kind of questions can be asked. So first thing, syllabus. Second thing is PYQ. Based upon that, you can reorient as to what particular chapter and within that chapter, which particular topic is more important. Next is with respect to weightage of different subjects. I told you there are so many subjects for prelims, right? So which subject gets a maximum weightage? you must understand that for your journey, there are certain subjects which we consider them as core subjects. And you cannot afford to be weak in those core subjects. The core subject should be your strengths rather than your weakness. What are these core subjects? Let's see here. Let me tell you, this is not the exact weightage in the UPSC prelims. This is the average weightage. It might fluctuate like plus or minus 5%. But on an average, this is the average weightage of all the subjects. And can you identify the core subjects here? Obviously, the core subjects here are your economy, your polity, and history. And within history, you have to study ancient, medieval, modern, and art and culture. So these three happens to be your core subjects for your UPSC prelims. And that is how, in fact, your mains exam or your main syllabus is also structured. If you read GS paper 1, the syllabus for GS paper 1, the syllabus for GS paper 1 is basically dominated by history for mains. GS paper 2 is basically dominated by polity, and GS paper 3 is basically dominated by economic. So obviously these three are your core subjects, and like I said before, I'm repeating now, you cannot afford to be weak in these subjects. You have to become strong in each of these three subjects. All right. Apart from that, let's say you are extremely well prepared for the prelims examination. You are very good prepared for the prelims. You have studied throughout the year. You have made good notes. You have revised. You have given SFG. You have given the prelims test series. After that, when you actually go to prelims examination, when you're attempting the prelims exam, in that case, if you look at the difficulty wise, I'm talking about an average student, understand. An average student who is well prepared. Even if you're well prepared for this UPSC exam, can you see how many questions will you find it to be easy? Somewhere around 10 to 15%. When I say 10 to 15%, it's like you look at a question and without thinking much, you know the answer to that question. Those questions, I'm considering them as easy, where you don't have to spend a lot of time to get the answer. That is an easy question, somewhere around 10 to 15. Then there will be certain moderate questions. When I say moderate questions, I'm basically telling about those questions where, let's say, there are 4 options. Out of those 4 options, you may have eliminated 2 options. And then you are in a dilemma as to which option should you choose between the remaining 2 options. Typical UPSC dilemma. That's what we generally face, right? Like 1 only and 1 and 2 only. So unless you know whether second statement is right or not, you'll not be able to get the right answer, right? So such kind of questions, dilemmatic kind of questions, is somewhere around 40 to 50%. That is the dilemmatic kind of questions. And when I say difficult questions are probably those questions where you absolutely have no idea at all. It may have so happened that you have read the entire length and breadth of syllabus, you have revised the current affairs, yet UPSC comes up with a bonser and which is completely unknown to you. Example being, in history, you have studied all the books. There's a book and author. So you have studied about all the books written by important historical personalities. But UPSC might come up with a random book about which you may have not heard of. It generally happens. Such kind of questions are difficult. Not just that, there are some questions where there are 4 options. You have eliminated 1 option and you are left with remaining 3 options. There also, you're in a dilemma. But here the dilemma is not to choose between 2. Here the dilemma is to choose between 3. So the probability of you getting wrong here in difficult questions is much higher as compared to moderate questions. Such questions I'm calling it as difficult. Getting it? So generally, when you are attempting prelims, right, what should be your approach? We generally say students, that you should go by iterations. When I say iteration, when you have a look at the paper for the first time, you should start solving from 1 to 100 and try to solve easy as well as moderate questions first. And once you have completed up to 100, where you have solved easy to moderate, then come back for the second iteration. In the second iteration, you can try to focus on the remaining moderate questions, which you consider is more tougher. And third iteration, you can come back and you can try to solve the difficult questions. So when you are following this kind of iteration-based approach, like first iteration, second iteration, and third iteration, the probability of you going wrong drastically reduces. Right? This is how you should be planning out the things. Apart from that, you know that UPSC Prelims examination has become quite dicey, quite difficult. So it is always safe, or it is always advised to go for calculated guesses. Always take a calculated guess, especially in the questions which are moderately tough. When I say calculated guesses, I mean to say intelligent guesses. And how should you take intelligent guesses? Once your preparation for prelims is done, right, you will be attempting multiple tests. When you're attempting multiple tests, you will be taking calculated guesses in those tests. When you're taking a calculated guesses in those tests, you must try to find out after the test how much of those calculated guesses you got it right and how much you got it wrong. You need to analyze your intelligent guesses. And after analyzing your intelligent guesses, you need to identify your strengths and your weak areas. So when you identify your strength, it basically means you know that on a particular topic, on a particular subject, if you take a calculated guess, you are most likely to be right. On a topic which is your weak area, if you take a calculated guess, you are more likely to be wrong. So what you should do, once you take this kind of feedback from the test series, that feedback, you should use it to improve yourself, which means you can work upon your weak areas so that your weak areas become strengths. It might so happen that in spite of you working very hard, the weak areas may continue to remain weak, right? Let's say something related to environment, about some international conventions. No matter how much you have read about international conventions on environment, you are repeatedly going wrong in answering those questions. It's a cue. It is an indicator that if a question on international convention on environment is asked in UPSC prelims, do not attempt it, because your chance of getting it wrong is more high. But if you get a question which is your strength and you think that if you take a calculated guess, it can be right, go for it. That is how we should be able to strategize oneself. And that you will learn as you become more matured in your journey in civil services. So now you'll be starting with the foundation, after that the test series, and in the test series you take this kind of feedback and then you keep on improving oneself. You keep on evolving like a aspirant. That is what is needed for your journey as well, right? Okay. Now look at the trends in the cutoff for the last 5-year prelims examination. Let's see for prelims 2025. For prelims 2025, for the general category students, the cutoff was 93. Last year it was 88. Last year it was 75. And then around 88. So, for prelims 2023, the cutoff was actually lower, right? Because the paper itself was on the tougher side. But let's consider this as an exception. Let's treat this as an exception. You should not consider that if I score 75, I might pass. It's an exception. let's concentrate on the latest, 93 and 88. So, how much should you score in the prelims to be above the cutoff? I would say, and safe score would be somewhere around 100 marks. If you score somewhere around 100, it means you are confident enough to clear the prelims examination. A safe score is somewhere around 100. That is what you should keep in your mind all the time while preparing for UPSC exam, prelims examination, right? And if you belong to some other category apart from general category, you can just look at the cutoff for economically weaker section, OBC, SCs and STs. I just compile everything at one particular place. Okay. In economy, we have something called as black swan event. What is black swan? Generally swans are white in color, but sometimes, very rarely, you'll come across black swan as well. So what do you think could be a black swan event? Black swan event is an event which is unanticipated, something you don't foresee coming, something which is completely unanticipated. Such events in economy, we call it as black swan event. Example of such a black swan event could be, you can see something like demonetization because no one saw it coming, or let's say COVID-19 or 9/11 attacks. These are some of the black swan events that we have witnessed in the recent past. Just like how the economy or the world can see a black swan event, a UPSC aspirant can also see a black swan event. What can be that black swan event? Let us see here. See, generally, what actually happens when you're preparing for UPSC Civil Services, people tend to concentrate a lot on GS paper 1, which is your polity, economy, history, geography, environment, etc. And they do not give adequate emphasis to CSAT. And you must understand, CSAT is qualifying. It means no matter how high you score in the prelims paper 1, GS paper 1, if you don't score the qualifying paper, that is CSAT, you will not qualify the prelims. An example of which is, you can see this particular student. In paper 1, the student has scored around 156. I would say phenomenally good score. It's very tough to score 156. But look at this student. In spite of scoring 156, the student has still not cleared the prelims because in paper 2, the student has got just 62.50. How much is the cutoff? 33% of what? 200. So the student should have scored minimum 66, but the student has scored just 62. So that is why the student could not make it to the prelims. And I really don't want you guys to have this kind of black swan event, which means you have to focus on the CSAT as well. So in our foundation class, obviously we will be teaching you all the basic subjects. Apart from that, you will also be having access to the CSAT classes as well. The basic idea is you guys should not have a black swan event. That's a thing. You should be well equipped to handle the questions from the CSAT. That is how the GS Foundation program is handled as well. Okay. In the UPSC prelims, the pattern of questions has been changing all the time. Now, UPSC is experimenting with the pattern of questions. Example being, you can see in prelims 2022, we had this question. You probably won't not know the answer because you have started your journey. But if you look at this question, I would say it's a very easy question. The reason why it is very easy question is there are 3 statements, and out of these 3 statements, I know that one statement is perfectly wrong. And if I eliminate that statement, I get the right answer without actually knowing about the remaining 2 statements. Example is, if you look at this question, the first statement says, in India, credit rating agencies are regulated by RBI. Credit rating agencies are not regulated by RBI. Credit rating agencies are regulated by SEBI, capital market regulator. So we know for sure that the first statement is wrong. When you know the first statement is wrong, go by elimination. I can eliminate this, I can eliminate this, and I can eliminate this, and I get the right answer, which is 2 and 3 only. I did not even bother to read the second and third statement. So that way, the prelims examination pattern of question before was relatively easy. There are some questions which are like this. But let's see what has happened now. Now, this is a new pattern of questions which UPSC has introduced now. Earlier, UPSC used to ask which statement is correct, which option is right. But now UPSC is not asking which option is right. Rather, UPSC is asking how many options are right. So can you see? Here it says how many of the above are used as a criteria by the 15th Finance Commission. So it's not easy to guess now. It has become more difficult, which means your intensity of preparation has to increase. Your coverage of knowledge has to increase, right? Your revision should be more intense. Then you can answer such kind of questions. So for these kind of questions, as you can see, it's difficult to solve unless the student knows all the options. Not just this type of questions. A new pattern of questions has also been introduced by UPSC. Like in Prelims 2023, it introduced these kind of statements. The statements which are based upon assertion and reasoning. What actually happens here is UPSC gives two statements like this. And then look at the options. Option A and option B. Option A says that both are right, and second statement is able to explain the first statement. And option B says both are right, but a second option is not able to explain the first statement, which obviously requires you to interlink the two things, right? So this requires additional level of preparation. Now, so far UPSC had introduced two statements. In Prelims 2025, it added a new format. A new format where instead of asking two questions, UPSC started asking, instead of asking two statements, UPSC started asking three statements. Statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3. And look at the options here, especially option 1. It says both statement 2 and statement 3 are right, and it is able to explain the first statement. So that way, the conceptual understanding which is needed to solve such kind of questions is very high now. Getting it? So that is how your preparation should also evolve in line with the trends of UPSC. Getting it? So we do know as to how UPSC has been changing the trends, and that is how in the class also, foundation class, we will be integrating those kind of questions so that you are able to solve those kind of questions in the actual prelims examination. Those questions should not become a complete bonser to you. And because I teach economy, I just want to tell you how my classes will be structured. When I will be starting your module, how will I be covering the entire length and breadth of Indian economy? This is the structure of my class. So in my class, what we'll be doing is, we'll be covering entire length and breadth of the UPSC syllabus, where I will not only be covering the static part. Apart from static part, I'll also be integrating the current affairs with the static part. The idea here is, once you attend the class, after attending the class, you should not feel a need to go out and read something else. You can totally rely on what is being taught in the class, both conceptual as well as current affairs. After that, in the class itself, once we cover a particular topic, from that particular topic, we will solve the previous year questions in the class. And not just previous year question, we'll also take up some practice question from that particular topic. Once that is done, look at your role. Your role is that you have to revise the class notes and the mind maps that we'll be discussing in the class. And that you should do it regularly. And let me tell you, this has been the general case of the students. What generally happens is when students start their foundation class, right? Initially, they are very enthusiastic. I've seen them all. Initially, they are enthusiastic. So generally happens is initial 1 month, they are very enthusiastic. And then by 3rd month or 4th month, slowly the class strength stops dipping. And what happens is the students who are attending offline, from offline they shift to the online. And what happens is the same students who shifted from offline to online, from online, after 1 month, they start watching the recorded classes. And please do understand that once you switch to recorded classes, after 1 month, you'll stop watching the classes itself. So look at the transition. Offline to online, online to recorded, recorded to gone. This is what has been the case with number of students. So what I would want with each one of you is be consistent, be dedicated, attend the class regularly, no matter what happens. And by chance, because of some unavoidable reasons, if you are missing the class, only then watch the recorded class so that you are in tune with what is being taught in the class. And like I said, a subject like economy, it is a core part. It's a core subject. You cannot ignore a subject like economy, polity, or history. Getting it? So that is what you must be doing. Apart from that, in the economy module, once the revision is done, what we'll be doing is, there will be a class test. And the class test will be at the end of every chapter. At the end of every chapter, there will be a class test, and this class test will be having 100 questions. 100 questions on every chapter. Let's say we have covered monetary policy. On monetary policy, 100 questions. We have covered public finance, taxation, 100 questions. That test will be done at the end of every chapter. And there will also be, these kind of tests will be of incremental nature. What is incremental nature? Let's say we have covered the first topic. Let's say the chapter is RBI. Immediately after completing chapter of RBI, you will be having test on RBI, on which you will have 100 questions. And let's say after that, we are covering the chapter of monetary policy. When we are completing this chapter of monetary policy, the syllabus for that particular test will not just be monetary policy. The syllabus will also be including the previous chapter, which is RBI. Getting it? So as we move forward with the syllabus, it will also include the previous chapters. Why are we doing this? Because I know that if I complete monetary policy, you'll revise only monetary policy and you'll forget RBI. In a way, I'm forcing you to revise every chapter, especially the previous chapters. That is how we'll be conducting the class test as well. Getting it? And after the class test, we'll be having doubt session where I'll be discussing your doubts. This is how the economy module is structured, right? Okay. Now just basically tell you as to how the classes are structured to make you understand how we'll be starting a module, how I will be teaching a concept. I'm just giving you a basic overview of what we'll be doing. Let's say we are starting a particular chapter. Let's say the chapter of monetary policy. This is a chapter that I'm starting off with. Before I start off with a particular chapter, I will tell you how many questions were asked from that particular chapter in the previous year prelims. And as you can see, here the chapter is monetary policy. On this particular chapter, I've shown you how many questions were asked in the previous year prelims. This basically will tell you how much importance should you give to a particular chapter. Should you give more importance or less importance? Once you understood the relative importance of the chapter, I will be showing you from that particular chapter, from where are the majority of the questions asked. Example is, can you see, from monetary policy, you have questions from different dimensions. So what I will be doing is, when I will be taking up your class on monetary policy, I will be approaching the class in a similar fashion. I will be giving more importance, more priority to these kind of topics, like questions related to money supply or the recent developments in monetary policy. That is how we'll be doing it in the class as well. Now, because it's a first class, I want to just teach you a very simple topic. And after teaching you a very simple topic, I will take up a previous year question as well as a practice question as well. Let's start with that particular topic. It's a very small topic, which anyway we'll be doing it later as well. But I just want you to understand how the pedagogy looks like. Okay. Please see here, we have a chapter called as RBI. And from this particular chapter, you can just see what all questions have been asked in the previous year prelims. Like there was a question on role of RBI as a banker's bank, role of RBI as a regulator, role of RBI as a lender of last resort, role of RBI as a debt manager. These are the kind of questions which have been asked in previous year prelims. Based upon that, just see, these are the roles of RBI, right? Just have a look at this mind map. What are the roles of RBI? And then compare this with the previous year questions. If you compare this with the previous year questions, you can just identify what all questions have already been asked. Questions have been asked with respect to lender of last resort, banker to banks, debt manager of the government, then regulator of banks. These are the questions which are already asked. So for the next year prelims, please think what topics might become important. For the next year prelims, probably the topics which are important is RBI's role in issuing bank notes, RBI role as a banker to government, RBI's role in regulating payment and settlement system. These are the topics which will become important, right? So I'll briefly touch upon one particular topic. We'll be discussing that topic in much greater detail when I start the economy module. But one small topic, which is bank notes. We'll take up that topic and then we will we'll take up a PYQ and the practice questions as well. Okay. Let's see here, what is the role of RBI in printing notes? I do hope everyone has a basic knowledge that RBI prints notes in India. And what is RBI, by the way? RBI is our central bank. As a central bank, it is printing notes. This is the most basic thing which I hope everyone knows it. Everyone probably knows that if you take out a bank note, on that particular note, it is mentioned, I promise to pay the bearer. That word is written, right? And below that sentence, you have the signature of RBI governor. So who is issuing that particular note? Not the government. The note is issued by RBI, Reserve Bank of India. That is what I'm just going to cover some basic things about printing of notes in India. Example being these dimensions. Like number one, who prints notes? So you all know that RBI prints notes, but within RBI there's a separate department. Within RBI there's a separate department which is called as the issue department. Issue department is printing notes. That's the first thing. Under which act are the notes printed? They are printed under RBI Act 1934. So RBI was established under this act only. RBI Act 1934, and under this act only we are printing notes. And if you see the denomination of notes, what do you mean by denomination? Denomination of notes means what's the face value of a note. You know, on note, you get notes of different denominations like 1 rupee, 2 rupee, 10 rupee, 20 rupee, 50 rupee, 100 rupee, 200 rupee, right? What are the different denominations, right? Here what you should know is there's a word which I'm using. I'm using the word bank notes. What is bank note, by the way? Bank note is a note which is actually printed by Reserve Bank of India, which is a note printed by RBI. That is what we call it as a bank note. Have you ever seen a 1 rupee note? If you see a 1 rupee note, you'll understand that this 1 rupee note is not printed by RBI. This 1 rupee note is actually printed by the government. For example, you could see here the note printed by the government, 1 rupee note. This is a 1 rupee note. It is not printed by RBI. It is rather printed by the government with the signature of Finance Secretary. Getting it? So that way, the minimum denomination of a bank note. What is bank note? Bank note is a note printed by RBI. By that logic, what is the minimum denomination of bank note? Not 1, rather it is 2. The reason is very simple. 1 rupee note is not a bank note, because bank note is a note printed by RBI. So 1 rupee note is not a bank note, right? So the minimum denomination of note which can be printed by RBI is rupees 2. What about the maximum denomination? What can be the maximum value of the note which the RBI can print? There's a limit. RBI cannot print a note of, let's say, 100 crore or whatever value. There's a maximum denomination. And that maximum denomination of bank note is rupees 10,000. We cannot have a note of more than rupees 10,000. Right now, if you see the note which is in circulation, the note which is printed by RBI in circulation, the maximum denomination of which is rupees 500. Earlier, you must be knowing, we had 2,000 rupee note also, but that 2,000 rupee note was taken out of circulation. Right now, it is the 500 rupee note. That's the maximum denomination. But RBI, if it wants, it can print a 10,000 rupee note as well. Do you think RBI has ever printed this 10,000 rupee note? Yes, it has printed a 10,000 rupee note. You can see here. This is a 10,000 rupee note. This 10,000 rupee note was actually printed and it was demonetized. Demonetized means taken out of circulation. And twice we demonetized the 10,000 rupee note. 1938 and 1954. So all of you have seen the 2016 demonetization. That 2016 demonetization is not first demonetization, rather it is third demonetization. Because even before this demonetization, twice demonetization had taken place in India. Getting it? Okay. Now the most important question. Why do people accept banknote? When I say something like this, I purchase something from you worth rupees 500. Imagine this. I purchase something from you worth 500 on a piece of paper. Let's say I put my signature and I give this piece of paper to you. Would you accept? Obviously not. Why would you not accept that paper? Ultimately, the 500 rupee note, which is printed by RBI, is also a piece of paper. And I am also writing 500 rupees on a piece of paper and giving it to you. You'll not accept it. You'll rather accept the note of the RBI. Why? The reason why you would accept that 500 rupee note is because that note is universally acceptable. When I say universally acceptable, it means if I give you that 500 rupee note printed by RBI, you will accept it only because you have the trust, you have a confidence that the same 500 rupee note, you can give it to someone. And by giving it to someone, from that someone, you can purchase something worth 500. Why is that someone accepting that 500 rupee note? Because that person knows that 500 rupee note, he or she can use it to purchase something from another person. So that 500 rupee note is universally acceptable. So people have a trust, confidence that that 500 rupee note is universally acceptable. That is why we accept the bank note. Example of that, if I could give you an example. You know, some of you must have seen this particular movie. It's an Oscar-winning movie, Shawshank Redemption. If you have seen this particular movie, you know, it's a movie based upon a prison break where, you know, people are, you know, the main character of the movie is actually coming up with a plan to break out of prison. But if you have carefully watched this movie, in this particular movie, it was shown that cigarette was actually used as money. The reason is, in prisons, people do not have a lot of money, cash. So instead of cash, they started using cigarettes. But why only cigarette? Because cigarette is something which is universally acceptable within prison, right? Let's see how. Example. These are the 4 characters from this particular movie. Okay? It's a hypothetical situation. Let's say this particular character, who is a smoker, to this particular person, he says, wash my 10 clothes. And for every cloth that you wash, I will give you 1 cigarette. This person is saying to that person. It's like saying, you know, normal case, you wash my 10 clothes. For every 1 cloth that you wash, I will give you $1. Can you see here what is happening? He's saying for every 1 cloth that you wash, I will give you 1 cigarette. Can you say cigarette has replaced dollar now? Right? Cigarette has become a medium of exchange to make payment for goods and service. So this person will accept cigarette. You might think, what's so great about it? This person is a smoker. He needs cigarette. That is why he is accepting it. Imagine, what if this person is a non-smoker? In spite of being a non-smoker, he is still accepting cigarette. Question is why? Because this person knows that using that same cigarette, he can purchase something else from another person. Imagine, this person can buy bread from this person by paying 10 cigarettes. And you know what is interesting? This person is also a non-smoker, but he is still accepting cigarette. Why is he accepting cigarette? Because he knows that that cigarette he can use it to purchase something from this person. So this person will buy biscuit packet from this person by paying 10 cigarettes. This person is accepting because using that cigarette he can purchase anything from some other person. And what is interesting in this whole thing is none of them, I mean, like, except this person, none of them actually need cigarette to smoke. Cigarette has become a de facto money here. Getting it? So, why do people accept, you know, cigarette in this case? Because people know that that cigarette is a medium of exchange. That particular cigarette is universally acceptable. They are confident that other people will also accept it. That's the reason they are willing to accept cigarettes. Going by that logic, think of it. Why will you accept a 500 rupee note printed by RBI? Because you are confident that that 500 rupee note, you can give it to someone and purchase goods worth 500. That's the reason why people accept the bank notes. That's reason number 1. There's a second reason why people accept the bank note. The second reason why people accept the bank note is because all the notes are considered to be legal tender. When I say legal tender, it means you are under obligation to accept the notes for the transaction. It's like saying, I purchase something from you, and let's say I'm paying you in terms of note. You are under obligation to accept that particular note. You cannot say to me that please don't give me that 500 rupee note. Instead of that 500 rupee note, give me gold or give me $1. You cannot say that. You are legally bound to accept that 500 rupee note. That concept itself, we call it as legal tender. Getting this point? Right? So there are 2 reasons why people accept the note. First reason, because it's universally acceptable. Second reason, because they are bound to accept it as per the law. You cannot reject the payment. Getting it? So by that logic, having discussed this topic, let's see this question asked in Prelims 2018. This was a question asked in Prelims 2018. The question says, which of the following statements correctly describes the meaning of legal tender money? Legal tender money. What is the correct meaning of this legal tender money? So when we say legal tender money, during demonetization of 2016, the government said that certain high denomination notes will cease to be a legal tender. Cease means they will no longer be considered as a legal tender. So, because the word legal tender was in news around the demonetization year, which was 2016, in 2018, the same question was asked. Conceptual question. So, the question might seem conceptual, but the question is motivated from what? Current affairs, demonetization. So, by that logic, when you see the right answer to this particular question, what is actually legal tender money? It is the money which a creditor is under compulsion to accept. This is the right answer. This is how we'll be covering a topic in the class. We'll be discussing some basic topic. And then after discussing a topic, then we will be taking up the PYQ and we'll solving the PYQ. Apart from solving the PYQs, we will also be taking up the practice questions, which are in the form of true and false. This is something that we'll be doing repeatedly after the end of every topic that I'm going to discuss. Example being, think of this. RBI has a sole authority to print all the notes in India, including 1 rupee note. Can you answer this question? What do you think the answer is? Is it true or false? Yes, please respond. Good, Likita. Okay, so you can see here, RBI has a sole authority to print all the notes, including 1 rupee note. It is obviously false. Look at the second statement. The 1 rupee note is issued by the government with the signature of Union Finance Minister. The statement might seem right, but it's actually wrong because it is not with the signature of Union Finance Minister, the signature of Union Finance Secretary. So that is why the second statement is false. The bank notes are printed under the purview of RBI Act 1934. It is true. There is a limit on denomination of notes which the RBI can print. Obviously, there is a limit. Minimum is ₹2, maximum is ₹10,000. RBI cannot print note of denomination less than ₹2, right? Because 1 rupee note is actually printed by government. RBI can print a note with a maximum denomination of ₹10,000, true. RBI has not printed 10,000 denomination note in India so far. It is wrong because we discussed that it has been printed twice. So this is how we will be covering the statement based questions. Right now, the statements might seem quite easy, but you must understand this is a first class. Deliberately, I have framed the statements to be quite easy. But as we move forward, the statements will start becoming more difficult. You'll have to spend more time to understand whether the statement is true or false. And that will happen over a period of time as we progress with the class. This is how we'll be doing it in the class. Okay. And whatever we are going to cover in economy, I would say please stick to the class notes. Do not study anything apart from the class notes. The reason being, in the class notes, you'll have both conceptual and current affairs. Generally in standards textbooks, you'll come across only the static part. But in the class, we'll cover both conceptual and static. And we always advise the students to keep their sources very limited. So keep your sources limited. And in my classes, we'll be understanding concepts through mind maps and flowcharts. the way we have seen this now, right? So it will give more conceptual clarity to you. And in the class itself, we'll be having number of practice questions, which are part of this PPT. If you revise a topic, after revising a topic, if you are able to solve the practice questions, you'll get more confidence then and there itself. You can revise the topics much more faster. Okay. Sumit, the 50 paisa coins are actually minted by the government. All the coins are minted by the government. Okay. All the coins are minted by the government. And not just the coins, even the 1 rupee note is printed by the government. Other notes are printed by RBI. Okay, Sumit? Okay. So far what we have done is we have covered the exam pattern, we have covered the approach for prelims, we'll cover the approach for mains before the last part, that is our teaching philosophy. So let's see the approach for the mains. Please see here in its notification, what does UPSC say with respect to mains examination? In its notification, UPSC says that the mains examination is intended to assess the overall intellectual traits. And not just intellectual trait, it also wants to test your depth of understanding rather than merely the range of information and memory. So like I said, for mains, two things are must. Your critical bent of mind, and second, your power of expression. How good are you in writing answers? Now, generally what happens in mains is everyone probably may have same set of notes. Everyone may probably read from same set of notes. Let's say in the class, there are 100 students. All the 100 students may get the same material. But out of that, what might happen is one student might score exceptionally high and the other student might score exceptionally low, even though both are studying from the same material. The reason why there is so much of divergence in the marks is how good they are at answer writing, how good they are in terms of introduction, body and conclusion. Now, mains is altogether different ball game. You must understand. Mains is more about answer writing. Prelims is more about conceptual understanding. The better you are at answer writing, you can score more marks in the mains examination. Getting it? So, just as an example, like this was a question in prelims 2018. This question was about the provisions related to NFSA, National Food Security Act. Here you are required to identify which of these provisions related to National Food Security Act are correct. This is what you are required to identify. So it can be answered based upon the knowledge of NFSA. But the topic is same. But on that same topic, look at the question in the mains examination. The question in the mains examination was, how has the Food Security Bill, which is your NFSA, helped in eliminating hunger and malnutrition? Now here, what you need is a critical bent of mind. How good are you in analyzing the government policies? And it also depends upon how good are you in expressing your viewpoint. How good are you in writing answers? Topic is same, but the way you see a topic is different. NFSA topic from the perspective of prelims is more about understanding, but the same topic from the perspective of mains is more about your critical bent of mind. Getting it? That is how the questions are generally asked. Okay, if you see the main syllabus, in paper 1, you have culture, history, geography and society. This is part of paper 1. So like I said, paper 1 is basically dominated by history and culture. Paper 2 is basically dominated by polity and governance. Paper 3 is basically dominated by economy. Apart from economy, you have environment, disaster management, internal security, and science and tech. And then you have an essay of 250 marks. And you have ethics and integrity of 250 marks. And then you have optional. So that way, if you add up the total marks will be around 1750. I told you that for the prelims, which subjects should you focus more upon? The core subjects, right? But when it comes to mains examination, like I said, it's a different ball game. For mains, what you should prioritize is, for mains, you should prioritize your optional subject and your ethics paper. This should be your priority areas. The reason being, optional subject has 500 marks. Its weightage is very high. Ethics, one paper or one subject alone is worth 250 marks. So these two subjects should be your priority areas when it comes to your mains examination. Apart from that, you should never neglect your essay, which is worth 250 marks. So what you should do is, once you're thorough with the GS part, the general studies part, when you start feeling confident about your GS part, then you must get on with the habit of writing essays. And generally, I advise that you should start writing essays once you're feeling confident. You should start writing essays, at least 2 essays every week. At least 2 essays. The reason is, just an example, even though it's my own subject, I'm still highlighting the same point. If you look at Indian economy, you generally get 100 marks every year. And the syllabus is extremely vast. You study agriculture, you study infrastructure, public finance. So the syllabus is very vast. In spite of studying so much, look at how much marks Indian economy is asked for. 100 marks. But essay, can you see how much it carries? 250 marks. But what I have found is, generally students end up spending so much time on GS that they tend to neglect the essay part. Though essay carries 250 marks by itself. So once you start feeling confident about writing essays, I would not advise you probably to start writing essay from day one, because it's not possible. So probably after 1 month, 2 months, once you start feeling more confident that yes, I can start writing essays, then go ahead with the essay writing. You know, just like how in school, you will start with ABCD and then you reach the highest level. Same way, when you write your first essay, for sure that essay will not be good. Take it for granted. But that first essay that you write, you put it on your study table. You put it on your study table. And then compare that first essay with the essay that you will write just before the mains examination. You can compare and contrast how you have evolved in terms of essay writing. That itself will give you huge confidence. So do that. That once you start confident in your preparation, every week start writing at least 2 essays. Considering that one essay generally takes 1.5 hours, 2 essays will take 3 hours, and I think it's quite easy to spare 3 hours every week for a subject which gets 250 marks. Hope I made myself very clear here, right? And you can also see what's the average marks people are getting. Average marks in paper 1, when I say average marks means I'm talking about the average marks of the toppers, top 50 students. Average marks is around 90 to 100. Paper 2, it is around 100 to 105. But generally people score less in paper 3. The reason why people score less in paper 3 is, number 1, when they are writing answers on economy, they write very general answers. No, Indian economy answers have to be given a lot of value addition. What kind of value addition? Basically, you need to use a lot of data, facts. You need to use a lot of diagrams. That is how you enrich the answers. So the reason number 1 is people do not use data, do not use diagram for economy. And reason number 2 is people tend to neglect subjects like disaster management and internal security. Example is, if you look at internal security carries almost half the marks allocated for economy, which is 50 marks. In spite of that, people do not give adequate focus to internal security. So you should not neglect this subject. You should prepare this particular subject thoroughly. And you must understand, a subject like internal security or disaster management, it is like a low hanging fruit. With a less number of efforts, you can get more output, which I cannot say the same with respect to other subjects. That's why you should try to score a little higher than 85 in GS paper 3. And then you could see essay, average is less than 25, GS paper is less than 125, and optional subject is somewhere around 250 to 270. This is what on an average people score. But let me tell you, this is average. ये आपका target नहीं होना चाहिए. This should not be your target. So when you're targeting the marks in the mains, you should have a target which is at least 20 to 30 marks more than this. It's like in optional, target somewhere around 300. When you target around 300, you will end up getting 270, 280. Same way, in paper 3, you must target around 100 to 110. If you're targeting around 100 to 110, you might end up getting somewhere around 90 marks. So your target should be a little higher than what is the average marks. Getting it? So keep this in handy, and you should keep focusing on what should be your average score in the prelims as well as the mains. Right? Okay. Now look at the trend in the cutoff for the mains examination in the last 5 years. Cutoff. So like I said, the total marks is around 1,750. This is the total marks for the mains. Out of that 1,750, you can see the cutoff marks. 739, 2025, 724, 729, 2023, 741. This is a cutoff for the mains. That is the interview call. If you want to get an interview call, how much marks should you score? So looking at the previous 3 years cutoff marks, I would say the safe score should be somewhere around 750. This is, I would say, something as safe. Never try to score somewhere just around the cutoff. What if you don't make the cutoff, right? So always score much higher than the cutoff so that you are safe. And a safe could be something on 750 to 760 marks. So you know how much target you should do for prelims. Like I said, the cutoff for the last 3 years is somewhere around 90. Try to target around 100 to 105 for prelims. For mains, you must target, I would say, around more than 750, right? To just clear the mains. But for being a topper, it's like you have to score exceptionally high. That is the target that you should keep in your mind. So right in the first class itself, I'm just laying down what you should be targeting. So that when you start your journey, you have a clear-cut goal. You have a clear-cut target in the front of mind. When you have clear-cut goal, target in front of mind, you will actually strive to achieve that particular goal. So there's something called as goal setting theory. According to this goal setting theory, you have goals, you'll start working towards a goal. You don't have goal, you don't work for it. As simple as that. So have some goals right now before you start the foundation so that you start achieving that particular goal. Okay. Now think of it. Individually, I'll come to your doubts. Just hold on. Just look at the evolution. Now, each one of us, including me, we have seen this kind of evolution, right? Like when we started in LKG, UKG, pre-primary, we started with the knowledge of numbers. 1, 2, 3, we started learning about it. Then as we moved forward, we understood the simple maths problems of addition and subtraction. And then at the secondary level, we went little advanced, where we started reading about percentage, profit or loss, time and distance. And when we reached class 11th or class 12th, we reached the highest level. Remember, if you are coming from a science background, you must have solved this differentiation and integration problems in the maths, right? This is how each one of us has evolved right from LKG to until class 12th. This is an evolution, learning curve. Just like how you have learned over a period of time, right from your childhood to until now, you must also understand that UPSC journey is a learning curve. It means there are different things that you must do at different stages of your preparation. If you think right from day one, I will start writing answers. Right from day one, I'll start writing essays. It is as good as saying that an LKJ student is thinking that he or she will solve integration or differentiation problems. Not likely to happen. Understand that. There is a learning curve in the UPSC Civil Service journey, and that learning curve you have to keep in mind. So when we have designed this GS Foundation Program 2027, we have kept the learning curve in mind. So how is this learning curve coming into this mind? Let's see here. This is how our teaching philosophy is also designed to be. First and foremost, we will start with pre-foundation NCERT classes, very basic things. We do understand that a lot of students might not have even the basic foundation. Let's say, let's talk about economy itself. In economy, probably people don't even know the basic concepts about what is primary sector, what is secondary sector, what is tertiary sector. People might not even know a basic concept like what is public sector, what is private sector, those things. So very basic things will be covered in the NCERT classes, where we help you to build the necessary knowledge which is needed to attend the foundation class. Once you are done with this NCERT classes, then you'll have almost 800 plus hours of GS foundation classes, which will include your prelims module, your mains module, your ethics module. All of these combined, you'll have 800 hours of classes. And see, we are very particular that if you're attending the classes, you must be able to grasp the concepts. You must be able to revise the concepts. And the best time to revise the concept is immediately after the class itself. Imagine you're sat in the class, you have understood a concept, you go back home, revise the concept, and then immediately attempt a test. So that gets further reinforced. So listening plus revising plus application. So that is how you keep reinforcing your knowledge. We know this. And that is why what we generally do is after every class, there will be learning outcome test after every class. So this learning outcome test will be a test based upon what is being taught to you. And these learning outcome tests may be both based upon objective questions or even the subjective questions. So you attend the class, we'll give you a test, you take that particular test to home, and you attempt that particular test and submit it within the 24 hours. We will check that particular outcome, learning outcome test and give you the feedback. And that will be on a every class basis. After every class, you'll have this learning outcome test. Apart from that learning outcome test, what we will also be doing is, let's say every 15 days or every 20 days, whatever syllabus is covered in the class, for that part of the syllabus, you'll have the benchmark test. And in this particular benchmark test, the questions will become relatively more tougher than what you would have got in learning outcome test. So look at the evolution. You're starting with learning a concept. Second, you apply that concept, and that application based questions are very easy. Then you go to the next level, little bit tougher, which is the benchmark test. And like I said, for economy is concerned, we will be having this benchmark test at the end of every chapter. And this benchmark test, like I said, it will be of incremental testing. You attempt the chapter of RBI, the test on RBI, the first test, and then let's say the second test you're attempting on monetary policy, but for the second test, the syllabus will include both monetary policy and RBI, incremental. So that is how you keep revising every, the length and breadth of the syllabus. Next, there are a number of reasons. There are a number of reasons why people don't make it to the final list. people put in efforts. People study very hard. In spite of that, some people don't make it to the list. And I, for one, know for sure the reason for their failure. The main reason for their failure is lack of mentorship. When you're studying for an exam which is as tough as UPSC, you need to know where are you going right, where are you going wrong. You need someone who is able to identify your strengths, your weak areas, so that you are constantly evolving as a civil service aspirant. By yourself, you might not be able to understand what is my weak areas, what is my strength areas. You need a mentor who has gone through this particular process, a person who is well aware of the pitfalls of the UPSC Civil Service journey. So throughout your journey in the GS Foundation, we will have a mentorship. The mentor will constantly guide you, constantly nudge you in the right direction so that you are able to clear the exam in the least number of attempts. We don't want you guys to learn from your mistakes. We want you guys to learn from our mistakes. That is where this mentorship comes into play. Understand that. Then you'll also have current affairs classes. I've seen some of you guys had asked me this question as to what about the current affairs classes. Yes, you'll have access to current affairs classes as well. In these current affairs classes, we'll also be covering the entire breadth of the current affairs, right? So GS Foundation is not just about the static part, it is also about integrating the current affairs. But please concentrate on the learning curve. Understand the learning curve. If I ask you to attend current affairs class on economy, right from day one, do you think you'll be able to grasp the current affairs? Imagine in the current affairs class, probably I'm talking about decline in net FDI into India. You'll be thinking in your mind, what is FDI? Why it has got declined? It is very difficult for you to correlate to current affairs right from day one. Understand that. There's a learning curve. There's a learning curve. Concentrate first on the static part. Once you are starting to feel confident with your static part, then start integrating the current affairs. I have seen this with respect to number of students. They tend to concentrate more on current affairs at the cost of the static part. Understand that yes, current affairs is important, but not at the cost of your static part. First, build your foundation. Your foundation should be strong. Once your foundation is strong, on that you build the pillars of current affairs. That's the right strategy. So yes, we'll have current affairs classes, and that current affairs classes will be part of your GS Foundation. But ensure that you integrate into your static part later once you're through with this. Then we'll also have the prelims test series. This prelims test series will be available to all of you guys. And the forum is quite well known for the both prelims test series as well as MGP, Mains Guidance Program. You'll have access to both prelims test series as well as the MGP program. So this is how we have taken care of your learning curve. We are in a way providing you with that kind of hand holding support, where we are starting with the most basic thing, which is NCERT, and then ending with the highest level, which is your mains guidance program. This is how your learning curve, this is how your evolution should also look like. And we do understand that while preparing, you'll have this kind of fear that from where should I get this material to prepare for prelims and mains. All of that, we will provide it to you through the Red Book and the Toolkit. Red Book is where you get all the content. Toolkit is where you can apply the concept and try to solve the questions. So that is how you are able to build the content and test that content to the toolkit. That is how we are going to integrate this thing.